Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight, I welcome back Seth Breedlove again. It's only been about 4 months since he was on with his last film, but he has a new one coming out October 20th called Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, and it's excellent. And we're going to be talking about that, as well as some other stuff, like the Mothman festival that he went to premiere his Mothman movie at. And, yeah, it's a pretty interesting conversation. There's some extra stuff for Patreons. And there should be some free viewings of the movie for Patreons in a couple of weeks as well. Other stuff I want to get to real quick before we start. I want to thank Allison for a very generous donation. And, of course, I want to always thank all of our Patreons for helping me keep this show going. It means a lot. It really does. And if you're interested in meeting up, I'm going to plan on being at Albatwitch Day, October 14th. It's down in southern Pennsylvania. Let me see if I can find the exact location here. It is Locust Street in Columbia, PA. Starts at 11 a.m., goes to 4 p.m. And there's live music, including music from Timothy Renner's band, Stone Breath. And Tim Renner is actually going to be doing a talk from 12 to 1 o'clock. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So there's at least 3 bands, at least 3 different lectures. There are also lectures from the Crypto Kid and Paranormal UK's Ron Murphy. And the poster basically says artwork, food, car show, dungeon tours, trolley tours, train display, apple pie contest, zombie beauty contest, family movie night, Halloween party, and much more. So this is kind of a free, like, it's the whole block type of thing, and there's a bunch of stuff going on. So I plan on being at it. If anyone wants to meet up there, well, come find me and Tim. And that's in 1 week from the initial airing of this, Saturday, October 14th, 2017. It'd be cool to meet some of you out there if you can make it. All right. If you want to become a patron, www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. Yes, wheredidtheroadgo.com. And, yeah, that's all I got for right now. Here's my talk with Seth. All right, welcome back to the show, Seth.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to do my best to get my energy back up today. I don't know what the deal is. I'm just like, I spent half the day just kind of sleeping, like trying to get back to some normalcy. But other than New York next weekend, I'm finally home for good. Now it's just like focusing on editing on Flatwoods and recuperating from my jaunt across the country over the last few weeks.
That can definitely wear you out.
A little bit.
And you have Invasion on Chestnut Ridge coming out. Is it the 20th?
Yeah, it's the 20th, and I'm sending out the review copies for our Kickstarter backers probably sometime in the coming week. We try to send, like, Kickstarter backers tend to get access to the movies about a week early usually, but this one I'm having a hard time holding off sending out because the movie's actually been done since the beginning of September. So it's weird. It's been like, this is the longest we've gone, I think, where the movie was done and we haven't shown it to anyone. So that's been a strange experience for me. But
why are you holding off on it? Why didn't you just put it out immediately?
Well, I said that it's all down to how we schedule out, the release and stuff. And with Mothman hitting in June, I felt like it was rushing it to release it any sooner because, we're still trying to let people discover Mothman. And then also just, this gets into a whole weird indie filmmaking marketing thing, but as independent film with no marketing budget and no one behind us, really handling our promo. My wife does all the promotion for us now, and we have to be very like aware of our release schedule and how to send out the information on our films to websites and stuff without overloading those websites with like releases and stuff, and trying to get coverage for the movies. The one thing we've been good at since the beginning that I can say is press. Like, we've always managed to get a decent amount of press behind our movies, and that is not typical of independent stuff that is on the scale of what we do, because we are so small scale, but we've managed to attract a fair amount of attention toward the movies. So I think it all comes down to, at this point, like, just trying not to overwhelm people with the amount of stuff we have coming out. And next year is even worse, because we have Flatwoods coming out in April, and then June is On the Trail of Champ, and then next October we're releasing Bray Road Beast. So we have 3 movies coming out, or 3 different projects, I guess, coming out next year. So we actually sat down the other day and had this whole meeting, like a marketing meeting, where we had to figure out how we're going to promote all this stuff we have coming out. So,
well, clearly you just need a television channel that you can unload it on every couple of months.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually, at some point, I would like to get like a Roku channel, like a Small Town Monsters Roku channel or something.
That's what I mean.
Something like that, where we could kind of have all our stuff located. I mean, at the end of next year, there's going to be, what is it? We already, with Flatwoods, we'll be at 6 movies, and then Bray will bring us to 7. But we'll also have the Case Files Volume 1. Season 1 thing out as well. So there's going to be a ton of Small Town Monsters stuff out there by the end of next year.
That's awesome.
It's been fun. I mean, it's been insane, but it's been a lot of fun. Like, this is probably the last like 6 months have been the most like chill, kind of fun filmmaking stuff I've gotten to be a part of, because it's, I don't know, at some point during the release during the wind down on Mothman, when I was like finishing the editing on it, I kind of I just let myself relax a little bit. I didn't, normally while we're winding down on editing, at least before Mothman, I was just a like stressed out mess, which I still am. But it's like much less revolving around the actual filmmaking side of things now, and we've just been having a lot of fun making the movies lately. Like, we were just filming in Flatwoods last weekend, and it was kind of cool, because every movie has this very specific, very different production process, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that with like Invasion, but Flatwoods is totally unique from anything else we've done, because it's been spread out over like 4 months and 3 days of filming. And every time we've gone down to film, it's been a different group of guys. So it's been a cool like 4 months, and we did all this traveling, and we just did the premiere of Mothman at the Mothman Festival, and that was crazy, and the response was super strong, and it looks like people are enjoying Invasion so far. So I think we're on the right track, hopefully.
And how did the Mothman Festival go?
It was good. It was I didn't know what to expect, because the movie had been out, since June. So even though we were like trying to push it, like, hey, you got to come see this movie, it's the premiere. Like, technically, all people had to do is turn on their TV and they could watch it at any time on Amazon. So it wasn't like it wasn't like I could really promote it like this is your first and only chance to see the movie. But I expected maybe like 100 people or something, and they kind of had this whole Friday night event scheduled around us. So it started with, I did like a talk about why we make our movies and how we make our movies and that kind of stuff. And then that went into the movie, and then afterward we did a Q&A, and it was in the State Theater, which is like 150 degrees, and it was completely packed out. Like, the movie, it was strange, because when my talk was going on, I thought, man, there's a lot more people here than I expected. They told me there was 173 people in there for my talk, and then I did notice a lot more people coming in, but I was outside, running my table or whatever. And at one point, right before the movie was supposed to start, Lyle came out and he was like, "Have you seen it in there?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "You got to come inside." So like I went inside, and here the theater was completely packed, like every seat, but the back along the wall, there were just people sitting on the floor and standing, and like anywhere you could get to watch the movie, people were there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really crazy. So I shot a couple like quick phone videos of that and stuff, but the response is really strong. It's a really strange experience showing that movie in Point Pleasant, because we actually showed it there back in May to a really small crowd. We did like a fundraiser event for the Mothman Festival, and I think we showed it to 100 people. And afterward, people were like crying, and relatives of people that died on the bridge came up to me and were like giving me hugs. And it was just very different from the experience we've had doing other screenings. And, because normally it's just kind of like, oh, this is a fun Bigfoot movie or whatever. And this was like a weirdly emotional like experience. And we had that same thing happen again. So the festival on the whole was huge. It was a great event. We had a blast and met a ton of like, people who'd never seen the movie and were excited to see the movie. I did learn some like cool Mothman trivia, Mothman related trivia while I was there. I guess I never had realized that we showed the movie in the State Theater, and afterward, someone came up to me and they were like, that the State Theater is actually where they took the bodies of the dead after they pulled them out of the Ohio River, after the bridge collapse. They actually put all 46 bodies, or I guess it would have been 44 bodies. Two of those have never been recovered, but they put them in the State Theater. I guess they just turned the air conditioner on full blast in the theater, and that's where all the bodies went. Which I'd never known that. And then there was another story, I probably shouldn't tell it on the air, but like it revolved around someone I knew had died in the bridge, and her dad. And there's just like, every time I go there, someone comes up to me and has some little piece of the story, like whether it's a Mothman related story or a bridge collapse story. Every time I go there, there's something new to learn. And then on my last day there, on like Sunday morning, I got downtown super early for some reason. I was down there at like 7 a.m. and it was still kind of dark, but it was really humid, and the fog was coming in so thick off the river that you couldn't see like 20 feet in front of you. And I ended up walking down to the river, and I thought, you know what, this is like the perfect time for me to go find the bridge plaque. Because for some reason, even though I've been there a ton of times this past year, I'd never actually gone down to see the plaque for where the bridge used to be. Mm-hmm. And so I walked down to where it was, and it was so foggy. I mean, it was like walking in a cloud or something. It was really weird. And so I had this really kind of cool moment by myself down there, just kind of reflecting on everything that's happened in the last year and having a part, or not, I guess not having a part, that sounds ego driven or something, but like getting to play a part in telling that story was, I guess, something that hit me in that moment. I don't think it had really hit me up until that moment. Like like this is all done. Everything's done. Cause when we're on such a crazy timetable with these movies that I don't ever stop and think, I guess, about we've moved on. Like you never really get closure. Like you're so, like I'm always so dead set, I guess, on whatever's coming next.
Well, sure.
That as soon as we finish the story, I'm on to the next thing. So it was a cool like moment of closure, which I don't normally get. So,
well,
but it was
awesome.
awesome event. Yeah, it was an awesome event, and we got to be there with Lyle, and that was our crew's first time back together since Boggy Creek Monster, where it was all of us. So that was our first time together in about a year and a half, where like my director of photography was there, and Jason, just like all my crew, and then Lyle. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's kind of awesome. Mm-hmm. And so then you put this thing out this month, Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. And I didn't realize how much activity there was around Chestnut Ridge, first of all. I've heard of some of these stories, but this is the first one you've done where I didn't really know very much of what you're telling in this.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of cool for me because, obviously I know a decent amount about the Mothman and stuff like that. And although you had tidbits in there I hadn't known,
Hmm.
and it was cool to see some of this stuff. This is the first one where I'm, other than the Kecksburg crash, I don't really know many of these stories. And that's made it that much more interesting for me. I love the fact that you're using like this. I love the intro, and I love the fact that you're using sort of an old film sort of feel to it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I thought that added a lot to it.
Cool.
Um, so let's get it. You have a lot of Stan Gordon on here too, and I've always liked Stan Gordon.
Yeah.
And you said you had how many hours worth of stuff with him?
His interview went 3.5 hours, and some of that had to do with the fact that we were filming. His background, in case you didn't notice, is really bizarre. It's just like a concrete wall, and that was because the morning we were filming his interview, it was insanely windy, and there was nowhere indoors for us to shoot his interview where we were. So we had to find this. We found this outbuilding and just kind of stuck him up on a stairwell. And shot the interview there. But yeah, 3.5 hours is how long his interview went. And Stan's got stories going all the way back to 1959. That's how long he's been into paranormal research, and he's a great deal of that time has been spent on the ridge, and he just had story after story, and like it got to the point towards the end where he just, like, I had to eventually just kind of shut it off. Like, we're done. I think I'm pretty sure we got everything we need for the movie. But yeah, he's got endless amounts of knowledge and information about, weird crap that's happened along the ridge. And our movie doesn't even scratch the surface of like weird paranormal happenings along the ridge. I mean, we could have made dozens of movies probably, and just gotten through his case books.
Yeah, and obviously the big one is the Kecksburg crash. What are your thoughts on the Kecksburg crash and what it was?
I don't know that I have any, because I think I lean more toward like the satellite idea, like it was some sort of Russian satellite or something like that. I think that makes the most sense. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think it was some sort of like alien craft or anything. But whatever it was, it seemed like it controlled itself when it was coming in. So that's confusing to me, because it seems like it made a turn somewhere along the line, and I don't know how just a falling object manages to do that unless it's piloted or controlled in some way.
Right.
So I don't necessarily have a specific favorite theory about what it might have been, but probably I think I lean more toward a weird, satellite or something like that. But that story, my favorite thing about that story is that it so sharply divided the town. Like, and I've heard that for years, but it's no exaggeration. Like there were legitimately for decades, like people in that town who didn't speak to each other because of, the fact that someone claimed to see the craft and the other person said that person was crazy. It really sharply divided the town. And we're actually finding the same sort of thing with Flatwoods, where it's like this one incident seems to be this polarizing thing that happens to this small community. But I don't know. I love the Kecksburg story, and we're actually going to get more into it in Case Files, because I shot an entire interview with an eyewitness that isn't in the movie, and I shot it specifically for Case Files. So we'll get into hopefully we get into some of the the Nazi bell stuff and the strange hieroglyphs that we're seeing on the side of the craft and everything. But the movie, it was difficult figuring out how much time to spend on each one of these cases. And I think we actually spend the most amount of time on the Kecksburg story, but it's like Eric Altman says, it's like the catalyst for everything that follows. Like it's it's as if after the Kecksburg crash, that's kind of the event that kicks off this decades long, well reported on series of weird crap.
Yeah. Huh. Um, I don't know. Like, I almost wonder if it was like a test flight instead of like being saying Russian, maybe one of ours that was a test flight, or even a Russian test flight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do we know of any satellites? Has anyone ever pointed to any satellites that came down in that time period?
I believe I believe there was actually a Russian satellite that did come down during that time period or go missing, something like that.
Okay.
And then there was also a meteorite that came down that same night, which is super suspicious. I mean, it could definitely have been that, but the problem I haven't spent enough time researching this to act like I'm some sort of expert on Kecksburg in any way.
Sure.
But the Kecksburg meteorite, to me, the weird thing about that is that meteorite was seen going out over, I want to say Lake Erie. I think it was out over, toward toward Canada, and this thing comes down in Pennsylvania. It would have, if it's a meteorite, it would have had to make a pretty sharp southward bound turn at some point, and come back down, which again, that doesn't sound like a falling object, like some sort of natural falling object. That sounds like something piloted.
Yeah, it's not the typical behavior of a meteorite.
Yeah. So I don't know. I love all the Kecksburg. I could have made an entire Kecksburg movie, and I think originally that was what this was going to be, for maybe like a week when we first started discussing what to do next. I think we originally had discussed doing Kecksburg solely as the movie, just the Kecksburg crash, and then it became let's do Kecksburg and the Uniontown, Fayette UFO Bigfoot movie. And then it became, as we started lining up our interviews, it started becoming what it is now, which is basically like a series of really weird stories from along the ridge over decades, and instead of focusing on one particular monster, it's more about this place where very weird things happen.
And where does the ridge run from to?
It starts in Indiana County in PA, which I believe is above Pittsburgh some ways, and then it runs down to just above Morgantown, West Virginia. So it runs fairly northerly part of PA down into the northern part of West Virginia.
Any idea what created it?
No.
Okay.
Monsters, probably space aliens or ancient astronauts. I have no idea.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Is it earthquake prone? I mean, is there a fault line running through there?
That I do not know. I don't think so. I haven't heard anything about that.
Okay.
But I lucked out on this movie, man. Normally that's the type of stuff that I would put in the movie, but on this one I let Mark Matsky kind of wrote the entire movie. So when it came to some of that information, it kind of passed me by. Normally we would have that kind of thing kind of in there, but I think Mark was much more fascinated by the human element of the ridge and like the people that go out and investigate, and then a little bit of the local history. That's another thing this movie doesn't have anywhere near as much. Our other movies spend a pretty decent amount of time on the small towns, and in this one, there's a little bit of backstory for Kecksburg, and then that's it.
Okay. I just figure if it's a ridge, it's probably been pushed up from something.
Right.
Which might mean there's a fault line there, which means, that tends to be where strange stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a ton of UFO sightings along there.
Yes.
Did you find any UFO sightings before the Kecksburg thing? Because the way it kind of lays out is you talk about the Kecksburg crash, and then it's like you talk about the UFO sightings afterwards. Was it known as a UFO hotspot prior?
So there are. This is the way I understand it, and this is the way Stan told it. There are stories of strange lights in the sky preceding Kecksburg, but there's nothing really documented until Kecksburg. You know, we have documented stories of like black cats and Bigfoots and wild men and all that stuff going back to the 1800s along the ridge, but we don't have anything newspaper reporting wise or documented that details any kind of UFO story. But according to Stan and Eric Altman, they were definitely taking place. It was just something that was kind of talked about rather than really reported on or documented in any way.
Okay, so after Kecksburg, of course, it brought attention to it, and then people started documenting it all.
Yeah, and I'm sure there were stories before Kecksburg, you know, that again, like that, just from what I was told while I was there. And Eric actually did recall a story about a farm, and I want to say it was near Ohio Pile, where a girl saw strange lights in the sky, and he couldn't remember the exact date, but he thought it was the very early 1900s, like 1910, 1912, somewhere in there. But it was on a farm near Ohio Pile, which is where we that's the area where we stayed when we went down and to film.
Okay, all right. There is a big upswing in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say there was a big upswing in UFOs in general in 1973. But
I think you're right.
But this area in particular, you talk about a ton of different stuff that happened in that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we didn't even really get into all the crazy stuff that happened during that time period. Like, we talked a little, like the movie talks briefly about Bell Farm, which is the place where Barry Clark had his sighting of the UFO craft coming down or whatever. But in that same location, there were a number of UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings, and then he also Eric actually told us about a farm near there that same year where they were reporting all kinds of weird stuff, like UFOs landing in their field and Bigfoots and black cats walking down like an exit ramp from the UFO together. So this is all taking place during that 73, 74 time period. But yeah, there's a number of reports. Of course, we do talk about the ones that involved UFOs and Bigfoots, because for whatever reason that did start to happen during those 2 years. But I think that's not the. I guess those ones that we cited are kind of the main cases that actually involve UFOs and Bigfoots. You have 5 or 6 out of tons that were taken during that time period. But my favorite involves the 2 girls who were waiting to go out to a party or something, and they're standing out they're standing outside their home in this rural part of Pennsylvania along the ridge, and they see this white Bigfoot-like creature go running across the street and down into an open field, and it's holding a strange glowing white orb in its hand as it's running.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they see this light shoot across the sky, and this weird beam shoot down into the woods where the creature had just run. And there's more to that story, but Stan is fiercely protective of his witnesses, and we didn't get into it in our film. But actually, the father of one of those girls went down to investigate. After he actually went down to the forested area where they'd seen the creature run, and later he came back and they said he was basically a changed man. Like something had happened down there. He never wanted to talk about it. And he was very different from then on, which really sounds similar to the way the sighting witness that saw his name's George Kowalczyk, but the witness who saw the 2 UFOs and the Bigfoot, or the UFO and the two Bigfoots in the field outside of Uniontown. I think it was Uniontown, PA. Who had the young boys in the movie? It's the animated sequence where he fires the shots at it and all that. He after his encounter, he actually had some sort of like mental break that night, while recounting his story to Stan, and then later he recalled having all these like visions of the apocalypse and all this stuff happening. So that's kind of strange. But
and that was they were just like walking through the field, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, basically, George was driving up to his house one night. I think he had his wife and his mom in the truck with him or something like that. And they got up to their house, and they see this strange glowing dome-shaped object above this field that he's near. So he takes his truck and he goes down to the bottom of the hill, and these two little kids that live down there are like, hey, can we go up with you to investigate? Because he was going to drive up the hill to see this light or whatever. And he says yeah. So the kids hop in the truck and they go driving up to the field, and when they get up there, they see this dome actually land in the field. And a couple seconds later, they notice these two figures that are following the fence line toward them. And they're basically like a classic Bigfoot type creature. They've got green glowing eyes. I think in our movie they're red glowing eyes, but in reality they were green, glowing green eyes. And they came walking down the fence line toward them. And George actually had a rifle with him, and he had for some reason he'd thrown some tracers in his pocket or something. He loaded the tracers, and he actually ended up shooting a couple shots at these things. And at one point, when he fired a shot, one of them reached its hand up almost as if to stop the bullet. And when it did, the light that was shining from the dome-like UFO or whatever kind of went out. And it blinked out. And the object itself, the dome itself, disappeared completely. Like the craft that they had shown up in was just all of a sudden it was gone. And the creatures were still there. And they turned around and ended up walking back up the fence line and out of sight. The weird thing about that is the noise. I guess they kept making this baby crying sound, which is frequently reported in Bigfoot sightings in that area for some reason, especially during that specific time period. But you actually would be surprised at the number of sightings that involve that. Someone saying that they heard what sounded like a baby crying. It was a number of these Bigfoot reports. So those are just two of the ones that involve like Bigfoots and UFOs. But there's any number of UFO reports from that same time period, and Stan obviously has reports that he can recall. That, like I said, I can recall at least 5 or 6 different UFO reports from that one time period that he told us and walked us through that we didn't include in the movie. So there's a lot that was going on in Westmoreland, especially during that time period. But the ones that always grab the attention are the ones that involve Bigfoots and UFOs. But again, I don't think that was common. I think those ones stand out because they're so unusual.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. And I mean, at that point, it's hard to say that this is just a flesh and blood creature when it's popping out of a UFO, unless it's an alien, or whatever you want to define, UFOs as. It puts a very different twist on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's one of the fun things about this movie is it took me so far, kind of outside my comfort zone, because I'm very much like I believe it's an undiscovered ape if they exist, and that it's like a flesh and blood creature. But this is so weird, and the stories are so strange. I was actually excited to get into something that was so bizarre and kind of allowed me to, consider all the possibilities for what might have been going on along the ridge. But honestly, it is one of those things where the more you look into this, the more questions you have.
Yeah.
And 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 every single researcher that we talk to that's been on the ridge for any length of time is like that. They're almost more befuddled now than they were when they first got into this. And Stan's been in it since '59. And he says, like it's at one point in the movie, he says that every time they think they're getting close to some answers, some case will come along that'll throw everything, that they think they have figured out the window.
And I think that goes for a lot of paranormal stuff. Like every time you think, ooh, wait, this all makes sense, and then there's that one monkey wrench that gets thrown in, almost like it's just playing with us.
Right.
But I mean, it's also possible that Bigfoot is a flesh and blood creature, and that this phenomena, whatever it is mimicking it.
Sure. Yeah. No. And you wonder the ridge itself and like how all these different phenomena seem to be concentrated there. I don't know of another place where there's this number of weird occurrences and weird sightings and different types of creatures. I saw Stan at the beginning of September. We were in Kentucky together, and he told me a story about a police officer who called him and told him about seeing this headless, some sort of like headless Bigfoot type. It was like a Bigfoot type creature with no head, walking across the field. And this was a police officer that reported this to him. And every time I talk to Stan, it's something like that. I mean, I've talked about this a little bit before, but there was originally a line in the narration that Mark Matsky wrote that referenced giant iridescent caterpillars. And I actually cut the line because for some reason I decided I was going to draw the line at what a general audience could handle at giant iridescent caterpillars. Because it's like I feel like the dragon is fine, but let's cut the caterpillars.
Well, the dragon's pretty damn weird too.
Yeah, no, I mean, none of these stories really sound normal. Even your typical Bigfoot reports get weird. Like the orb story towards the end of the movie, where they actually see the orb go into to what looks like a window that opens up in the woods. That was, I mean, they were out looking for Bigfoot that night, and they had been hearing what they thought were Bigfoot calls earlier in the evening. And then it turns into this strange floating orb-like thing in the middle of the forest, disappearing into some sort of transdimensional portal or something. I mean, every story, I felt like every time we heard a story, there was some weird aspect to it. Like the three-toed Bigfoot tracks even and stuff like that. I mean, it's just I think it's a weird area, but I have no theories of my own as to what's causing it.
The orb thing, you're telling the story there, and he says his friend goes to shine a big light at the orb, and that's when it went into this transdimensional. But I was fully expecting the orb to dart out of the way of the beam, not to open a window and go through it. I'm like, oh, that's different. Okay.
That's new. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a strange, I really like the way Chris Scalf kind of illustrated it, and animated it. 'Cause it's just moving so kind of like slow and, just like it's just some sort of aerial phenomenon moving through the forest. And what struck me about that is it's one of the only things I've encountered for myself in the forest was a strange light. And this was like maybe 5 years ago. I was out with my dad down near what's called Zor Lake. There's this old Quaker village not far, about a mile from where I grew up in Bolivar, Ohio. And it's a historic landmark. They've tried to keep the village basically like it was in the 1800s. And right near the village is this lake. And the lake actually butts right up to my parents' house. But my dad and I were probably a mile down along the lake. And I looked out across the lake, and we were up on a hill. So when I looked out across the lake, I could see, a couple miles away, probably into the distance. And I saw what looked like just a huge glowing, like orange basketball come up out of these trees across the valley, and I figure it's maybe like a half mile away. But it was really bizarre. It just came up very, very slowly, sat in the sky for probably like 2 minutes. I had time to get my dad to walk up and look at it with me, and we're standing there looking at it. And then really slowly, it just went right back down into the trees. And, it could have been a Chinese lantern or something. I'm not ruling any of that stuff out, but that's the only thing I can definitively say for myself that I've experienced something similar, while I was out in the woods. So
Right.
that story really stuck with me for some reason, and that was one I wanted to make sure we had included in the film, because I do separate that from like a typical UFO encounter. I don't necessarily see those two as connected. I mean, obviously there might be something connecting all of this, but as far as like specific phenomena, I don't necessarily associate an orb with like a UFO.
Although at the same time, they are both just lights in
Yeah.
many cases.
Yep. Yeah.
And they may have the connection in plasma because, even when you see like something silvery that looks like a UFO, plasma during the day especially can look silver.
Mm-hmm.
So
what do you think? I mean, do you have your own theories or anything on what you think like something like that might be? I mean, do you think it's some sort of natural aerial phenomena that can occur, or where do you fall?
Are we talking about the orbs or UFOs in general?
Yeah.
Orbs, I suspect there's intelligence there.
Okay.
I do think it picks up because I've seen them. There's a particular graveyard down in Ithaca there where I've seen them quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And my impression of them is that they are something intelligent, but they might be using natural processes to appear to us. So certain areas might be more set for these things to actually manifest, like the Marfa lights. Down in Texas, these things move away from you if you try to go toward them, and if you just stand there, sometimes they'll move towards you. They seem to display some rudimentary intelligence.
Yeah, there's one of those in Arkansas, right? That shows up along a railroad track.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name, but it's a story I really enjoy because I watched an episode of Unsolved Mysteries while I was doing research for Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, actually, about it.
So yeah, I mean that stuff. It's hard to say because a natural process might seem to interact intelligently, even though it's not.
Sure.
But if I had a guess, I would say it's something with some level of intelligence. It's just not something we understand.
Sure.
Let's see, what else is there I wanted to get to here? Oh, the Odd Man, which I thought was going to go in the Man in Black type of direction. It does a little bit, but it almost sounds like someone's either pretending to be military or is military, and it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, the Mystery Man story is one of probably a dozen that I'm aware of that Stan told us about. That the one we got into was the Superior Mobile Home Court Mystery Man, and that's a story that basically there were a series of sightings of Bigfoot-like creatures in the Superior Mobile Home Court, and in general that area around Superior. There were a lot of sightings that took place in that area, but specifically within the mobile home court, there were some really bizarre sightings of upright walking creatures. And one night after a Bigfoot was seen in the area, there were tracks found. And the next day, actually, this car shows up, and it had Ohio government plates on it, and this strange kind of Stan just said he was an odd-appearing man, and when they say that, I don't think you hear that and you think Men in Black, like maybe it's like Alien, like it's not like that. It was like, if I remember right, Stan said he was wearing like a Hawaiian shirt, and just the way he was dressed and stuff was really weird. It wasn't that he necessarily looked like the classic kind of like alien in human form Men in Black thing. It wasn't like that. It was just very kind of weird looking dude. But he showed up and proceeded to wreck the Bigfoot track that was there, like stomped it out, stole a picture from a little child. This kid had taken a photo of the track, and he actually took the picture from him. and then took off, like flew off into the night. And there were other encounters around that same time with mystery men type figures, but that was probably my favorite. And it was also my favorite thing that I shot in the entire movie, because I filmed that completely alone, as far as like shooting it. And my dad played the mystery man.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Were there Men in Black accounts?
Like that story kind of reminds me of some of the more common Men in Black encounters that I heard about in Mothman, where it almost seems like they were shady government figures. Not so much the weirder aspects of the Men in Black phenomena, but yeah, there were definitely encounters with Men in Black type figures. I just don't think they ever necessarily sound exactly like what we typically ascribe to like a Men in Black encounter, but there were definitely weird, shadowy government agents or people claiming to be government agents in the area, including, in the movie we get into a guy that contacted Stan, telling him he wanted to see, any information he had on Bigfoot sightings, and told him to send it to the United States. Shoot, it's a ridiculous thing. It doesn't exist. He said he wanted him to send it to his office at the United States Bird and Mammals Lab, maybe something like that, something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things like that. And then the other one I always thought was really bizarre is that Stan was in contact with members, like assistants to a congressman, to the point where Stan actually had like lunch with them and stuff. And all they wanted to talk about was Stan's investigation into this stuff. So there were government officials that were genuinely curious about what was going on in the area, especially in 73, 74. That's kind of, that seems, aside from Kecksburg, that seems to be the height of everything that's gone on the ridge. Although in truth, the more you look into it, the more that you find that things there kind of just get weirder by the year. So, and sometimes it gets more well reported on, and that kind of pushes it more into the public eye. But there were definitely Men in Black type things going on along the ridge back then, and today even. I mean, one of the things that we left out of the movie that I hope to get to at some point is that for decades, people have been encountering shadowy military operations taking place on the ridge. In fact, one of the people that's in the movie even took a photo at one point of what appears to be like a Black Hawk helicopter along the ridge, like an unmarked black. Oh, it's not Black Hawk. It's like an unmarked Apache helicopter is what it is. And he has a photo of that I thought was really intriguing. But actually, the guy that took that photo told all sorts of stories on camera about people encountering these weird military men who were carrying Russian weapons and wearing possible Russian insignia. So it's almost like he thought that, we got into conspiracy theory territory, but like his theory was, that it was there was some sort of hidden Russian military training exercises going on the Chestnut Ridge. But I mean, there's, again, like you can research this thing for years and find story after story like this. There's no end of strange activity along the ridge, but that bizarre Russian military is one of the more unusual ones that I encountered. I couldn't find a place to fit it into the movie that would have made sense. Right.
Are you aware of any, is this an area where people tend to go missing or anything?
Yeah, we get asked that a lot. There's only one case that I'm aware of where someone has gone missing and then turned up dead, and I cannot talk about it, or there's certain people who are who are furious about this. I don't even know if I want to say that. There's a specific case that took place along the ridge, and it's put very popular ufologists at odds with each other.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So there's one case in particular that I'm aware of. But I did ask Dwayne, who actually is the guy who saw the orb, about missing persons cases on the ridge, and he said he was sure there probably were some, but he didn't have anything he could tell me off the top of his head.
Okay.
It would make sense. It would make it'd make perfect sense in that place.
One of the stories you tell is about a UFO that knocks the power out, and it actually blows a bunch of fuses in the movie theater. But it also it goes right to the power station, and in a lot of these cases, they also follow the power lines, which is something you do see in UFOs.
Mm-hmm. And that is a consistent thing that was taking place back then, and not just relegated to UFOs, also Bigfoot sightings. In fact, there was
Really?
a Bigfoot sighting. Yeah, a Bigfoot sighting where this lady heard a strange baby crying sound outside of her mobile home. She opens the door, and there's a Bigfoot rummaging through the electric box outside of her house. And if I remember right, that case does eventually involve like MIB type agents showing up at the house as well later that night. So Stan had a story about a lady and her son driving along a road, and this would have been in '73, I believe, who had a UFO pass over their car, and when it did, the car completely shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And she was hit with basically like an overwhelming sense of dread when it happened. And the car, but when it passed overhead, her car just completely shut down. And then once it had passed over, the car started back up. So the power source thing is a consistent thing that, like we kept hearing that. Like we were hearing stories about Bigfoot's rummaging in electric boxes, and or UFOs taking out power in cars and houses and that kind of thing. That was a common occurrence, and I believe still is a common occurrence along the ridge.
You got to wonder why. Like what is it? And if we go back to the idea that it could be something natural, it could be something that uses that type of energy too.
Right.
It's picking up energy from these things.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the guys, shoot, I can't remember his name, but one of the guys, Tom Ankney, Tom, I believe at the end of the movie, that's his theory, is that this all takes place on the ridge. For some reason, he thinks there's more power sources along the ridge or something, and they're drawn to those power sources, and like he's talking mostly about like electric and stuff like that. But it does seem odd that so many of the cases revolve around that. In fact, I can remember Eric telling us a story that led into an orb story, but began with a man who had been seeing a Bigfoot around a power substation along one of the more isolated stretches of the ridge. It might not have been a substation. Well, no, I think it was a substation in a more isolated section of the ridge. And I might have to do something for Case Files where I can include that story, because I know Eric told that story in full. But basically a park ranger had seen a Bigfoot near this substation, called them. They came out to investigate, and then the next night they encountered an orb. Because I don't know, you might have caught it, but Eric said that he's actually encountered those lights in the woods more than once. And almost anyone you talk to that does any kind of investigating up in that area has encountered orbs more than, one time.
Yeah. The baby crying thing is freaking weird. You get that sometimes in other sorts of paranormal reports. Of course, you also get it with certain animals. Like, I forget what kind of, there's a big cat that can sound off a lot like a baby crying.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, what's really strange about it is that it was so consistently reported on. Like it was. I mean, there's a large number of these reports that involve that, and it's one of those things. It's probably, aside from the green glowing eyes, which was also a consistently reported upon thing, it's the thing that pops out at me the most as being constant. And what's weird about it is I don't see that baby crying thing all that often in Bigfoot reports. Maybe once in a while, but it's not very often that you see a report of a Bigfoot that talks about, it sounded like a baby crying. Usually it's like a woman screaming or, something like that. So it was a weird thing that was being consistently reported.
And it's always saying fear-based. Baby crying, brings up fear. A woman screaming brings up fear.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why.
I don't know either. I know that when my baby screams, I fear for my lack of sleep that I know is coming.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you just hear a baby screaming outside your house, you're kind of like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah. Yeah. And what's really funny is, and I think this happens subconsciously because of the fact that I make these movies, but shortly after we were into post-production on this movie, my mom and dad, who again, they live in kind of a cool, like, rural area called Bolivar in Ohio, and right behind their house is just a forest area, and then beyond that is this massive field that leads down to the Tuscarawas River, and then beyond that is just miles of forest. But they started hearing what they thought was a baby crying in the woods behind their house, and I'm like, I have to believe that this is related to the fact that they watched my movie and are somehow, convinced that this is, because I think my parents want to see a Bigfoot now. I think that's like their secret desire is to have their own encounter or something. But they've heard it twice in about 4 months behind their house, very, very clearly. In fact, one night it actually woke them both up.
Wow, that's loud.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that's going to creep people out if they hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you said there was a lot of weirdness in filming this movie.
Yeah, but not the type of weirdness that you're probably excited to hear about. It was we filmed the movie in about 2.5 days, which is our most abbreviated shooting schedule ever. It wasn't as crazy as refilming all of Beast of Whitehall in a day and a half, but with Beast of Whitehall, we had most of our B-roll shot already over a 4-day period earlier in the summer. So it's a little different. This, we literally shot the entire movie in 2.5 days. All the nighttime B-roll, a lot of stuff was shot in that 2.5 days. All our interviews were shot. So we shot 8 interviews and then all this B-roll and everything in about 2.5 days. And when it was over, we were just completely wiped out. I mean, everyone was, the entire crew was just completely wiped out.
Oh, I'm sure.
And the making of featurette is subtitled How to Lose Your Mind in 3 days or something like that. I forget the title I gave. But it was funny because what we actually did is we rented an old farmhouse, like an 1800s farmhouse on the ridge, and we basically set up like a base of operations there and then never left. So once we got through shooting like the Kecksburg location and some of our other locations on the drive to the farmhouse, we set up base at this farmhouse and then never left. So we shot all the rest of our interviews there. And then all the B-roll, everything else was filmed on the drive on the drive-in on the first day. So all the Kecksburg and, the Superior Mobile Home Court and all that stuff was shot on that first day. And then everything else was filmed on location at this farmhouse. And we were like, it was funny because there was, the farmhouse sat at the base of this giant hill. In fact, the hill is probably more like a mountain. If you climbed the hill, you could see all the way into Maryland. It was a big freaking hill. And at the top of the hill was the house of the people who owned the farmhouse, so the landowners. And we had cleared it with them, like, hey, we're going to film. You're going to see a bunch of weird stuff going on. Just ignore it or whatever. And but I guess they didn't realize how weird, because we had we had colored lights out there, and we're setting off smoke bombs, and there's fog everywhere, and like we were doing all kind of weird stuff in their yard, and it was hilarious because the next night they had so much fun watching us film that. I guess on the first night, that the next night they had friends come over. And they set up like lawn chairs up on the top of this hill, and they were watching us film like the next night. So we became like the local excitement, the local entertainment. And the only other thing that was semi weird was that supposedly the house we were staying in was haunted by a ghost named Brad, who was I guess he was a caretaker of the property who died of a heart attack at the age of like 45. And the only reason they said he haunted the house was because the basement light would turn on and off at random. And it didn't have any effect on most of us, but it really messed with two of my guys. Like we'd be outside and that light would come on and they would both just freak out. The rest of us were just kind of amused by it.
Right.
But yeah, it was a weird shoot. I think just because of the fact that it was filmed in such a short period of time, and we did so much.
All right. And where can people find it, or when? And it'll be out on October 20th.
October 20th, Amazon and Vimeo on demand, and then DVD through shop.smalltownmonsters.com. And I should probably mention that The Mothman of Point Pleasant is free through Amazon Prime now. So nice. for a short period of time, I haven't decided yet how long, but probably 6 weeks or thereabouts, Mothman is free through Amazon Prime. So if you have it, you can jump on there and watch it.
Cool. All right. Well, I thank you for spending some time with us. As I said, I really enjoyed this one. I've enjoyed all your movies, but this one in particular, because there was so much I didn't know, and it's just left me with a lot more questions, and that's what I like.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, man.
And this is called Invasion on Chestnut Ridge.
Yes.
And your website?
smalltownmonsters.com.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, man.
All right. As I said, there's an extra segment with Seth for Patreons. I'll be putting that up this week. And I should have some free viewings be given away to some Patreons as well.